behalf of the so this is a wonderful turnout. Delighted to see so many people able to join us this evening. And for those of you who are not aware, ICHG is a speciality group of RCPCH, so the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. But we are not RCPCH. We are a separate entity who are affiliated. We have a very active advocacy subgroup as part of our committee, which is led by Dr. Kerry Blackett, who is on the call today, and also Jolene Mwangi. And this webinar is the latest in a series of webinars that we've been running, looking particularly at child health and conflict. So if you are not already a member of ICHG, we would encourage you to join. You can see the QR code here. We currently have over 420 members in 28 different countries around the world. You don't have to be a paediatrician to join. Any child health professional, researcher or advocate can join. So the purpose of today's webinar is really to focus our thoughts and attention on the devastating humanitarian situation in the Middle East, specifically in Gaza, for children. And it's important that we consider what we as child health professionals can do to advocate for the health and the well-being of vulnerable children who are caught in the middle of this conflict. So just a bit of housekeeping. This is a topic that I'm sure many of you will feel very passionately about, and we look forward to having a rich discussion today. But considering the emotional nature of the topic, we kindly ask that some ground rules are observed in terms of being respectful about other people's opinions, inclusive in our language and our approach to the discussions. If you have any questions or comments, and we really encourage those, particularly in the second half of the webinar, when we want to have an open discussion, please place these in the chat. And feel free to give your name, place of work, and your profession in the chat as well. Just to let you know, we will be recording the webinar. And we are delighted to partner with a newly formed advocacy group called Child Health Advocates for Palestine, which Rayhana Henderson is representing today. So Rayhana is a community paediatrician in Bradford with an interest in global child health and Down syndrome. And I will hand over to Rayhana, who will be my co-chair for this evening. Thank you, Rayhana.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having us along you with the ICHG and supporting us with this webinar. I'm quite excited to be here, and it's so good to see such dedicated group of individuals coming together. We have a very meaningful webinar lined up for you with amazing panelists. So yes, I will share a little detail about our child health advocating for Palestine group. We were officially formed pretty much almost.
Oh, I know, it's terrific.
Over a year ago, where we done some advocacy work and some lobbying with the MPs, as well as gathering letters and signatories from colleagues, pediatricians and child health allies, asking the prime ministers, both from the previous government and the current government, to do an arms embargo against Israel, and also impose sanctions until Israel complies with international law. So that is the background. We're just independent pediatricians who came together, and we all had significant concerns about the situation in Gaza, particularly children. So yes, I will share our little groups details with you during the chat. We've got a Blue Sky account, which I'll share with you, and please contact me and join our group. We are little but mighty, and we've managed to lobby with, as I said, with the MPs and with the Royal College president as well on some important matters. So I've been given a task to talk about Gaza. I feel a bit of a hypocrite in front of all the lovely panelists who are here who have been to Gaza. I've never been to Gaza and I'm not a Palestinian, but I've learned a lot about Gaza and Palestine and Palestinians in my journey over the last 18 months. So I'll share a bit of that with you. To my understanding, Gaza is a very small strip of land. It's only 365 kilometers long, but hosts around 2.2 million Palestinians. And approximately 50% of this population is children and infants under the age of 16. So very young population. To put this in perspective, I live in West Yorkshire. We have similar 2.2 million in West Yorkshire, but our square meter is 2,000 kilometers square meter. So it's 6 times bigger than Gaza. And the population of youngsters is only 21%. So a very crowded piece of land, lots and lots of children, and that's where the devastations come from. And historically, I'm sure Tony knows better than me because historically he's been involved in Gaza more than me. But historically, there has been always been issues around the state of child health and nutrition in Gaza and for women and children. And because they've been under siege since pretty much 2005, and all the fundings has been cut and regulated by Israel, they've been living under quite a significant level of health apartheid, not able to access a lot of vital healthcare, and the infrastructure has been always quite poor. They rely on a lot of international humanitarian aid to go in. So they didn't start in a good place even before the war anyway. But since the 10th of October, when the ground invasion and occupation of Gaza has happened, the devastations have been absolutely catastrophic. We know that an estimate of 18,000 children have been killed and possibly around 20,000 missing and unaccompanied more. We know that around 17,000 to 38,000 children have been orphaned, and we know that roughly around 11 children per day have been amputated and lost a limb or encountered lifelong disability, vision impairment, hearing, and significant disability, which is unprecedented at the level of amputee children. So these are the statistics coming out from the UN observers and other charities. They're only an estimate, and the understanding is that the catastrophe and the cost of lives have been even further than the numbers that we have in front of us. And on top of that, children, you have to be mindful of all the emotional and psychological aspects of this war on children. Only yesterday, the UNRWA chief commissioner, Dr. Philip Lazzaroni, came out in a report and said this is a war on children. It's a war on their childhood and their future. And reports that the number of children killed in 12 months in Gaza is higher than 4 years of worldwide conflict, children being killed. So just the rate of it is quite significant. That's why we're here to talk about it. And we've all seen in the news what happened last night and early hours this morning during a ceasefire, where 17 days of but even during the ceasefire, they've been under 17 days of humanitarian aid and water being cut, and followed by bombardment, which sadly has taken 347 lives and 200 of them children. So it is, and that's why we're here. We're here to talk to you and talk you through what is happening in Gaza, what's happened in the past, and hopefully we can get you on board with some advocacy and actions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rehana. And if I could ask the audience, please just make sure that you're muted, and feel free to post in the chat if you have any questions for us. So we'll start with the first panel member, who almost doesn't need any introduction. But for those of you that don't know him, Dr. Tony Waterston is a retired consultant paediatrician who worked predominantly in a community setting in Newcastle for many years. But Tony has extensive experience working globally in Zambia, Zimbabwe, and also for several years he was director of the RCPCH Child Health Master Diploma, then Master's Teaching Program in the occupied Palestinian territories. Tony is very active in child health advocacy. He's an executive member of ISOP, International Society for Social Pediatrics. Until very recently, he was the chief moderator for CHIFA, and he also sits on the advisory committee for ICHG. So, Tony, I'd like to invite you to unmute and share your experience with us and your thoughts around the current situation in Gaza.
Yes, thank you very much, Helen and Rehan. And please excuse me if I get emotional at times, because this is a very emotional issue to me and to many of the people here. I'm going to start with a quote from an article in The Lancet that you may or may not have seen. It's a review, and it starts, "Was it a necessary invasion, undertaken as humanely as possible to eradicate a potent source of terrorism, or a brutal attack on a civilian population designed to create fear? These two narratives are replayed in relation to the Israeli-Gaza conflict." And the article goes on with some examples. 12-year-old Ahmed, the nephew of a Palestinian surgeon who died after both legs and much of his genitals were blown off. Mahmoud, aged 11, who was sent by his parents to play on the roof since they thought it would be safer than playing on the ground, and returned with 20 to 30 small dotted holes in his chest wall and died shortly afterwards.
Tony, sorry, could you please unmute? I think he accidentally muted you.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and Jimana, a 9-month-old infant whose hand was amputated after the house in which her family were sheltering was bombed, killing 11 family members. In total, during 2 weeks, Gilbert and Foss, two Norwegian surgeons, performed 270 operations, which included 53 amputations, 36 brain operations, and 43 fracture treatments. And the article ends, "It's now widely accepted that doctors who do not speak out against torture are complicit. Should we not apply the same argument in respect of any war that devastates civilians?" I wrote that in 2011 as a review of a wonderful book called Eyes in Gaza, which was eyewitness accounts from two amazing surgeons who were there during the war from 28 to 2010. That's nearly 15 years ago. So really, we're seeing the same thing over and over again. And I'd just like to give a very brief history of not really the conflict, but really of the Royal College involvement in the conflict and my personal involvement in it and my course of history, because I think it's very important to recognize the history of this dreadful traumatic period. And it started for me in about 1990s when I met two Palestinian nurses in Newcastle who were in a mothers and child health course. Up till that time, I'd been a fervent advocate of everything that Israel was doing. I'd worked twice in a kibbutz, and I knew many individual health workers in Israel and admired what they were doing. But this eye-opener of hearing from Palestinian nurses from Gaza of the reality made me sit up and think again. So when the college discussed starting a course in 1999, I jumped at it and I applied. And this was the brainchild of David Baum, an amazing Jewish pediatrician who had a strong history and love for Israel, but was understanding of the situation. He sadly died shortly after that on the cycle ride to promote funds for the program. But he wanted to build a course as a bridge for peace. particularly between Gaza and other countries. So we went out then funded by the British government to set up the course. And it was in Gaza originally because the Minister of Health was based in Gaza at that time. And it took some time, but basically it developed into a really thriving master's, which ran out of money in about 2013 or 14. And over that period, in fact, there were three Gaza wars, 2008 to 2009, 2012, 2014, and then 2021. So there was never a moment when there wasn't a war going on. What I saw was devastating. Really, from the very first visit, poverty was paramount. But the resilience of the people, in spite of that, was incredible. So there was an extremely strong medical education program, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, which was a good example for the rest of the region. Courage in standing up to all the difficulties, and in particular the impact of the problems, house demolitions, the theft of land, particularly in the West Bank, and that continually goes on a daily basis. The interference with access to healthcare by the barrier wall and by roadblocks, which would happen without any warning, so that people might take 3 hours to reach a health clinic, which in fact was only 10 minutes drive away. And the increasing violence by settlers against villagers in the West Bank. So that was really what I saw throughout. But I think the work of the college was really extraordinarily good in developing relationships with, in fact, originally doctors, but then doctors and nurses and then other disciplines. And what was originally set up as a GP program, but became slightly wider than that, but was based on primary health care. And I think it showed that the college had a very important role in developing this education. And it's something that we'd really like to see happening again in the future. I think that's enough for the moment from me.
Tony, thank you so much. That's really fascinating to hear. Especially institutional memories sometimes can get lost. And I think as a younger generation pediatrician, I really value knowing the Royal College's history in that way, and the fact that conflict was going on throughout a lot of that time when the Royal College was operating and running that really valuable course. I'm sure lots of people will have questions for you. Please post them in the chat if you have specific questions for Tony regarding his previous work there and the Royal College's previous role. I just have one quick question, Tony, before we move on to our next panel member. When did the RCPCH's programme finish in Gaza? And what was it that caused that to happen?
Yeah, well, I think it was 2015. It was around that. I don't have the exact date in front of me. It was a little bit of a struggle at the end, but basically it was funding, because originally it was the British government that was a sort of pilot starting it up, and then it was medical aid for the Palestinians, together with college funds, and the intention was it became self-supporting. It would become self-supporting, and this was with Al-Quds University Medical School, which is based in Jerusalem. In East Jerusalem. But they were facing very severe funding problems at that point. And we had long discussions about whether people should pay, and they could pay, but it was only quite small amounts they were able to pay. And they said they would try and find funding from other parts of the Arab world, but basically that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. So that was the reason, and I think it was a big disappointment. I'd actually handed over to Doug Simkis at that point. So I wasn't in charge right at the end. And there were some ways it continued, and there were plans to be involved in disability. And in fact, there was a development of a program in Lebanon with Palestinian refugee camps. So I think it's perfectly possible for it to be started again in some form. I think partly also it was quite an ambitious program. It required quite a lot of visits, because all the teaching was in country and there were many visits by tutors. So
Mhm.
that was quite complicated to arrange. But I
Sure.
should say, when I think one of the great benefits was every president during that period of 15 years visited to take part and took part in the program. And Terence Stevenson visited twice. So I think this was huge, huge educational benefit to them to really understand the situation, because quite honestly, a lot of people really don't understand
Mhm.
the depth of the problems there and the depth of the impact of the occupation.
Thank you so much, Tony. We'll maybe come back to that after the other panelists have spoken during the discussion at the end. Thank you so much. Rayhana, I'll hand over to you for the next panelist.
Thank you, Helen. So I'm honored to introduce the next panelist who joined us quite last minute and made time for this webinar, which I'm very grateful. Dr. Sana Ali, who is a consultant pediatrician in the UK with a special interest in epilepsy and neurology. She's been involved in many research projects and advocacy projects, but her recent role has been quite amazing, and that is the Deputy MDT lead, faculty specialist, and well-being lead for the caseworkers at this amazing charity called Children Not Numbers, which is an international NGO, supporting children in Gaza while they're in Gaza, supporting the healthcare staff, providing the best care for them through MDT discussions, and also facilitating evacuation when they can of the seriously injured children who needs treatment outside Gaza. So they've achieved amazing outcomes so far with very little. And without further ado, I'll bring in Dr. Sana Ali. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rayhana. Good evening, everybody. I've put together a little bit about Children Not Numbers and what we do as an organisation, including some case studies. I would like to say that some of the stuff that I have mentioned is quite graphic, but I think it's important for us to understand the extent of what is happening on the ground. So Children Not Numbers is a medical legal NGO that was founded in March 2024 during the bombardment of Gaza. Our mission has always been and remains to assist and optimise medical care and rehabilitation for children who are sick and injured in Gaza, and we're required to advocate and arrange medical evacuations. Other programmes that we have achieved to date include an orphan support project where we currently support 71 children, a maternal health hub, which to date we've given antenatal care to over 500 pregnant women, a retinopathy of prematurity screening service, a rehabilitation and physiotherapy programme, a pharmacy procurement team, and we have recently opened a school. The scale of the problem is beyond what any of us can imagine. Over 45,000 people have been killed, over which 70% are women and children. Bear in mind, this figure was reported in November 2024 and has remained static despite the continuing onslaught of Palestinians. This does not include those missing under the rubble, the sick or injured, or those requiring rehab or prosthetics. At Children Not Numbers, we have had over 400 children registered with us, and we have been involved in over 230 medical evacuations of children to host countries. Our routes of referral are via our teams on the ground, other parents or families who hear of our work, other NGOs, and via social media. There has been a complete decimation of what was already a restricted healthcare system prior to October the 7th. Every hospital has been attacked, staff numbers have been depleted, especially senior doctors who've been killed, taken hostage, or fled, and there is a critical lack of equipment. Currently, there is no sedation, no analgesia, no anaesthesia, no electricity, no aid, a severe shortage in sterile equipment and consumables, as well as restrictions on medical and surgical missions. There are hundreds of examples I could give of cases highlighting the lack of medical facilities in country, but here are a couple. Child L is a 4-year-old girl who was referred to us with worsening seizures and recurrent meningitis. When she had her meningitis, the cells were confirmed on CSF microscopy, but the hospital she was in were unable to do blood or CSF cultures, so she had to be treated empirically. She then developed what we assume was status epilepticus. She was encephalopathic, and despite being on Keppra, sodium valproate, and lamotrigine, there were no other anti-epileptic medications available. She was admitted to ITU in Gaza, where she had a midazolam infusion for a few hours, but this then had to be rationed and discontinued for her. There was no EEG available in country, and she remained like this with a GCS of around 8 in a tent for 3 months before we evacuated her to Belgium. She was there, admitted to ITU, was fully worked up. She doesn't have a diagnosis yet, but she's awaiting genetic testing and has now made an excellent recovery. She's attending school and she's been weaned off most of her medications aside from Keppra. Another case is a child W, a 15-year-old with polycystic kidney disease and end-stage renal failure requiring dialysis. She was referred to us in November 2024 as her permacath was removed due to infection and they were unable to source another one. The clinicians on the ground were extremely reluctant to carry out peritoneal dialysis on her because of the poor sanitary conditions they have to work in. This girl was annexed in the north, and so there was extreme difficulty sourcing a new line for her, despite there being doctors who would be able to do the procedure. With a lot of hard work from many teams, we managed to source a line in the south of Gaza, which we then got delivered to the north by a World Health Organization transport team so she could receive her dialysis. Unfortunately, she now has an infected line again, and through which she continues to have her dialysis, but we cannot source another line for her, and we are unable to get one into the country. We are still waiting for her evacuation. We have relatively simple congenital cardiac cases that have been registered with us, such as those needing PDA ligation or simple VSD closures that had developed cardiac failure and died, as there's no cardiothoracic surgeons. We also have children with severe trauma, such as hindquarter and limb amputations with colostomies who we cannot get evacuated. In the first 2 months of the war, UNICEF reported that over 1,000 children had lost one or both legs. It has since been described as the biggest cohort of paediatric amputees in history. There is little in-country rehab facility and no prosthetics available, with a severe shortage of wheelchairs and walking aids, rendering those who are injured immobile. Alongside this, we continue to see severe malnutrition. There is very little formula or food available, and water sanitation is a huge problem. As an organisation, we've had to ration who we give formula to, and we've had difficulty sourcing nutritional supplements such as Nutributter. The consequences, as we all know, are devastating for those, especially under the age of 5, as we know they'll have irreversible growth and intellectual difficulties. All of our families and children have been displaced at some point, majority of them multiple times, living in harsh conditions in a tent. It has been reported that around 15 babies froze to death in the last couple of months. All children in Gaza have had no formal schooling for over 16 months. Most schools were targets and have been destroyed. Children Not Numbers has set up a school in South Gaza where we have 350 children attending a week. Alongside being taught national curriculum items, they also receive psychological support as well as health checks and clothing. I implore with you and the wider world to speak up. We need to advocate for the children of Gaza and give them the same opportunities and access to basic rights as our children. If you would like to support or learn more about Children Not Numbers work, then please contact myself and please follow us on Instagram. Lastly, there is an AGM motion for vote regarding the protection for children's rights and well-being in Gaza at the RCPCH conference on Thursday, the 27th of March at 12:15 p.m. Please make sure that you use your vote in support of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sana. That was quite an eye-opener report you shared with us from the ground. That was only 2 cases of your very wide caseload. And just really saddened, obviously there are the cases that are quite complex in any country, but really saddened to hear that children are dying of basic, simple congenital anomalies or even a simple line infection just because of the shortage of such devices in the country. I can see the chat and everybody's absolutely moved by your statement you've just read. People are asking, have you managed to evacuate anyone to the UK?
No, unfortunately not. There were talks with some of the hospitals, but unfortunately at government level, it was all denied.
That's quite shocking. So what are the countries that are taking children off you?
So we've had countries gone to Italy, Romania, Belgium, UAE, Egypt, and Turkey. And we've had some go to Ireland as well, sorry, we have.
And the funding and once these countries take them, they are responsible for providing the treatment and
Yeah, most countries apart from Egypt. So at the moment, we are still supporting a lot of our children in Egypt just because their health system is completely inundated. But once they are in other countries, then yes, they take over the care.
And I'm sure we'll come back to you with the questions at the end, but I'll just leave a way for the other panelists and questions. Thank you very much for your presentation, joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. That was absolutely moving, and thank you so much for sharing your experience. So next I'd like to introduce Dr. Ishaq Abu Arafi, who is a consultant paediatrician, paediatric neurologist at the Royal Hospital for Sick Children in Glasgow. He's a past president of the Scottish Paediatric Society, co-founder of the Scottish Paediatric Neurology Group, and also a previous council member of RCPCH from 2010 to 2015. So also during the time that the Child Health Masters in Palestine was ongoing. So thank you very much, Dr. Ishaq, and I will hand over the floor to you.
Well, thank you very much, Kerry, and thank you very much, Rihanna. And I'm overwhelmed actually with what I have heard, although it's nothing new to me, but putting the things and giving them names is so moving. I don't want to go again with the statistics because you are all familiar with it and you probably have seen it many times. But from among all these statistics, it's very important to say that essential requirement for life has been destroyed in Gaza in particular, and now the war is extending now to the north of the West Bank. People being deprived from houses, food, clean water, electricity, clothes, warmth, roads, transport, all the things. But among all the statistics which we have read about, one statistic has stood out for me. And that's probably because of the work which we do and we would like to do in the future. In 2024, August 2024, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency estimated that about 10 children every day lose at least either one leg or two legs. And if we say by that time there was 300 days of war, that was 3,000 children who lost their limbs. That was just from October to August, and the numbers are increasing, and the problem is not getting any better. So what we sorry. So what we are working with is a Center for Children with Disabilities and Neurodiversity in Jerusalem. And this center has been there for the last 40 or 50 years. And it has been, I think it was established in 1964, but there was a period of time when it was inactive and then they reactivated its work. But the most important thing, it has satellite clinics and outreach services, which goes up to different parts of the West Bank and to Gaza. As Tony has explained earlier, the roadblocks and the restriction of access to Jerusalem to patients in the West Bank and Gaza meant that many of them will need the services of this center, which provide for children with schooling, education, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, and psychology. They cannot get to the center. So in Gaza, the outreach services of this center was based at Al-Ahli Hospital. And you probably all remember on 17th of October, 2 weeks after the war started, it was bombed, and it was the first hospital to be destroyed. All the services were suspended from October to June 2024. However, the services of the satellite clinic looking after children with disability, children with cerebral palsy, children with injuries has resumed in June 2024, and it became more operational in September 2024. However, the displacement of people across the several parts of Gaza meant that even children could not get to the Al-Ahli hospital, especially for the children who have moved to the southern part of Gaza in Rafah and Deir al-Balah. And the services were provided to patients in their tents and providing psychosocial support, providing physiotherapy support, and occupational therapy support. So there were staffing problems. The staffing had to be were displaced as well as the patients. So people will try to make makeshift accommodations for providing whatever they can for the children. Even until recently, the occupational therapists were working with the children in tents and in wherever they take refuge, whether it's at UNRWA schools or in public places. So there are at the moment we provide for those children who lost their limbs and children who need services of AHPs or neuro disabilities. There is a dire needs for trained staff, whether they are in medical staff or with therapists, but also we need the equipment. And the most recent visit for our team to Gaza, which has shown that we know what the child need, but we can't provide them the orthotics, and we need quite a lot of prosthetics as well and walking aids. So because of all the overwhelming needs, our group in United Kingdom, which was formed quite a couple of years ago, get together and we try to see how we can provide certain services to them. So we need to provide training for people with specialist skills, whether it's in physio or occupational therapy or speech and language. Also, we need to help our medical colleagues and pediatricians there to gain also the expertise in probably services which they were not prepared for, or they have not planned, or they have not had training for. There are some initiatives for recycling orthotics, walking aid, and try to adapt it for the children and according as they grow older. And we were been negotiating with several universities in United Kingdom to provide distance teaching and courses for our staff there. And we are getting good response from Strathclyde University in Glasgow, who are giving us scholarship for therapists to attend courses. We have possibilities to get some help from Kiel University. And most recently, the Imperial College, they have a research unit on blast injuries, and they felt maybe working with people in Gaza would help. Also, mutual benefit for both the university and for the training of our people there. I know that most other people can speak on other aspects of the medical needs for the children and the disabilities they are facing. However, I will urge people to also join this group and try to make a difference, and also to make use of their vote in the coming AGM for the RCBCH in 2 weeks' time. However, there are lots of opportunities we need to discuss. We have to discuss it within the RCBCH, and we need to encourage RCBCH to take an active role in many different ways. We can help in providing training for pediatricians in rehabilitation medicine. We can also use the technology of telemedicine and telehealth in reaching out to people in Gaza, but also can invite Palestinian professionals to conferences and workshops here in the United Kingdom. And these are the things which the RCBCH can do, and we really need to make sure that we make sure that the RCBCH is responsive to that. But that all will be depending on how the AGM goes, and hopefully that motion will be supported by all of you. Don't want to talk. I will stop here, and I'll give it space and time for other members of the panel. Thank you very much again for giving me this opportunity to introduce the work with the small amount of work which we have been engaged with. Thank you.
Ishak, thank you so much. It's really wonderful, the work that you're doing, and particularly with the teleconferencing and the virtual training. There is such power and such value in that. Really, congratulations. And I completely agree. This is the type of thing that the Royal College could very feasibly be supporting. We have met with the Royal College, with the President on a few occasions to discuss and to try and lobby for the Royal College to do more, and helping the post-conflict, fingers crossed, if the ceasefire is sustained, helping in the post-conflict reconstruction of health services is something that we should continue to lobby for.
Thank you.
Thank you. And there is a comment from Andrew, who's a peds OT in London, who would love to be involved with where possible.
Just drop me a line.
Great. If you don't mind putting some contact details maybe in the chat, and people can contact you directly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Rayhana.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, Ishak. Very amazing work you're doing. Definitely much more needed in Gaza and West Bank. So I am introducing my good friend of mine, recent friend. We've done some actions together in December, which was handing over the petition to number 10 Downing Street, knocking on number 10, handing in a petition which asked the Prime Minister to ends arms sale to Israel, which was signed by over 880 pediatricians. So Dr. Hamad Khan, he's a consultant neonatologist in London with an expertise in digital health. He's passionate about child health advocacy and for protecting the rights of children in all parts of the world. I would like to ask Hamad about the importance of healthcare workers speaking up against humanitarian catastrophes, and from transitioning from being a pediatrician to being an advocate, but also the significance of maintaining neutrality when we are doing that advocacy work. Thank you, Hamad.
Thank you, Rihanna. It's a real privilege to be here as part of this group and to have an opportunity to speak. I'm a pediatrician, just like a lot of you here, or involved, and many of you are involved in some way in child health. There's a question that might be put to you if you voice an opinion about the devastation that is happening currently in Gaza, which is, what's special about Gaza? Why is this particular conflict, and why is the suffering of the people of Gaza any different from the suffering of people in any other part of the world, in any other conflict, whether it's Ukraine or Yemen or Afghanistan for that matter? And the answer, the simple answer, of course, is that for the individual child caught up in a conflict, it doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter which part of the world you are from. But that really goes to the heart of the matter. We as child health professionals have we're either doing our jobs because we get paid to do our jobs, and that is it. We get paid to care, which would be an awful, awful sin, in my opinion. Or we're doing it because we believe passionately that looking after children is a duty and is our responsibility. And in which case, and given the skills and the knowledge that we are granted, that duty is paramount for us. And in which case, it shouldn't matter which part of the world a child is in, be it in Gaza, the West Bank, West Africa. A child suffering is a child that requires us to advocate for. And what does it mean for us as child health professionals to advocate? Therefore, does it mean that we just advocate for health for these children? Because if a child is sick, then they should receive health care. And is that what we're saying? And of course, we know that it is far more complex than that. The United Nations International Charter on the Rights of the Child spells out in significant detail, and there are close to 200 countries that are signatory to the international to the ICRC, and it spells out in very fine detail the responsibility of what are called states parties, and that's what the UN essentially calls countries and governments and civil systems within countries. And it lays out the responsibilities that each of those states parties have for the care and well-being of children. And it relates within every single domain that we can think about in terms of the things that are important in terms of the rights of children, whether that is the right to a family, the right to food, the right to education, the right to health. We know that all of these things are so critical in the development of children into adults and them having the capacity to be able to reach their full potential, that any single aspect that falls short is a shortcoming that we as child health professionals should be speaking up against. What we see and what we have seen in terms of the conflict in Gaza is, I won't go into the details again because it has already been highlighted very eloquently by many colleagues this evening. But I think it's important for us to reiterate what it means in terms of a proportion. The devastation that we've seen over the last 18 months it puts the number of children who've been killed in conflict over the last many years into small numbers. In October of 2024, the statistics that we had at that time, the same number of children had been killed in conflicts in the last 4 years prior to that. And so the proportion of children who have been devastated, killed, injured in Gaza is absolutely huge, and it's not just those aspects. It is what you might call scholasticide, is the destruction of educational infrastructure. It is the devastation of clean water, the inadequacy of food supplies, all of these things. And as child health professionals, we have a duty to speak up. And I think we all recognize that. But then what does that mean? And what does our advocacy mean? And of course, it means speaking up at every opportunity. And right at the very beginning, Tony spoke very emotionally, but importantly, about the fact that silence is complicity. And we have to say this. And we must repeat that there is a moral failing for those who do not speak up for the rights of any innocent caught up in a conflict, but especially for children. And so I would say to you, there's a great anxiety around the conflict in Gaza, that people feel that they cannot speak, that they are somehow censored because they will be accused of being with advocating for a terrorist group, or somehow speaking out against um, a religious group and being anti-Semitic. Never ever shy away from that. I will say to my colleagues, please don't ever shy away from that. You are speaking for what is true, and you're speaking for what is right. Um, it's not just child health professionals that have a responsibility, and anyone with any moral backbone has a responsibility. Governments have a responsibility. Governments act for us. They have a responsibility. We should continue to push and advocate for our government here in the UK, and for colleagues, I can see colleagues from around the world, for those governments around the world to act, and to act in every way possible. And governments have lots of mechanisms to act, much more than we do as individuals. For us here in the UK, the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, and again, someone has already spoken about Ali's motion, which is going to be presented at the annual general meeting of the Royal College at the end of this month. Our Royal College is supposed to be a voice for us as pediatricians, and there are actually a significant number of global health pediatricians part of the Royal College now. I don't know the exact numbers, but certainly it has a significant impact on what the college's voice should mean. We cannot stand by and let the college not speak out for what is important. And I think for that reason, this motion, support for this motion, is going to be incredibly important. I'll close by saying it does feel for many health professionals that our capacity to be able to make a difference is limited, but there is much that we can do, and whether that is supporting organizations like Children Not Numbers, or Medical Aid for Palestine, or other charity organizations, and I'm involved with a charity organization called Humanity First. And there are many others out there that are working on the ground, and it's supporting them, and it may be supporting them financially or through fundraising, and it may be supporting them directly through the help that we're able to provide as child health professionals. But action is important at any level, and whatever you are able to do, and everyone's circumstances are different. Whatever you're able to do, I would say, please do act. Thank you, Hannah.
Hannah. Thank you, Hannah. That's spot on. Very good. Thanks for your speaking, encouraging us to speak up and to use our moral compass, because, as you say, silence is complicity, especially in our field as child health professionals. So I'm going to hand it to Helen to introduce our next speaker. And please bear with us, because at the after the next speaker, we're going to bring in Professor Ali to talk us through the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Rehana. And just to echo Hamad, eloquently put, beautifully put, and I couldn't agree more. And it brings us really nicely onto our next panelist, who is Dr. Omar Abdulmanan, who is a British-Egyptian paediatric neurologist in London, who has a long history of training medical students and junior doctors in Gaza and the West Bank as part of the Oxford Teaching Initiative. He's also founder and president of Health Workers for Palestine, which is a global grassroots movement of health workers, and does extensive advocacy for children in Gaza. So before you tell us a bit about your work, Omar, I think what I really want to know from you, and I'm sure lots of our audience members do too, is what can we as UK, predominantly UK child health professionals, how best can we use our influence to affect change for Gaza, but also in other conflict zones? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Helen, and thank you, Rehana, and to all the previous speakers. And thank you, Hamad, for setting the scene and actually covering a lot of the groundwork for this. So the question is, as you said, what can UK pediatricians do to advocate for children in Gaza and other conflict zones? And I think there's multiple elements to this. So I'll start off by the first element, which is speaking out, challenging the silence and misinformation that is out there. And I think that my own personal journey through this, and I'll come back to it later, started all the way back in medical school in Oxford when Operation Cast Lead happened. That was the first incursion on Gaza, and I saw activism from both students but also health professionals at that stage, which really lit the flame for kind of this activism and this work. But really, at this point and in this current conflict, it was really the 17th of October, which was mentioned by Dr. Ishaq earlier, the bombing of Al Ahli Baptist Hospital, the killing of 700 Palestinian patients, women, children, men, seeking refuge in a hospital. That was the breaking point for myself in terms of speaking out. We saw hospitals being bombed, we saw ambulances being targeted, we saw doctors being killed, over 1,200 doctors so far. And that night, watching what happened at Al Ahli, it became clear that treating children as a pediatrician is not enough. We must also fight for them. And as doctors and as child health professionals, we must challenge this. So what can you do? The first is to use your professional voice. Your voice, believe it or not, is probably the most trusted and respected voice of any profession in the UK and probably globally. And by writing letters to your newspapers, publishing opinion pieces in medical journals, sharing evidence-based reports on social media, ensuring that every child's death in Gaza is not ignored, is not normalized, is not reduced to statistics. Because the reality is, the reason we've reached this point is because for too long, Palestinians and Palestinian children have been dehumanized in the media, in our political spheres, in our daily lives. Secondly, I would say you need to call out when you see medical apartheid. And what do I mean by that? I mean advocating against double standards in how children's suffering is reported and responded to. There was a global outrage for Ukrainian children, understandably, and done in the correct way. It was immediate. These children were evacuated to the UK for treatment. There were over 20 children that came to my trust and had chemotherapy treatment for cancer. So why are Palestinian children treated so differently? Why have no children arrived in the UK for treatment here? We have to ask ourselves that. And thirdly, within that scope of speaking up, it is educating your peers. Many colleagues may not fully understand the impact of war and occupation on a child's health. So use your platform at conferences, at hospital meetings, pediatric societies to raise awareness and demand accountability. Many of the return medics from the WHO emergency medical teams with MAP and other NGOs have held grand rounds across UK hospitals in Oxford, in London, to educate their peers. And we really need more of this. We need people to help organize such events. The second part I would say is pressuring the UK government, using your voice to pressure the UK government and medical institutions. And again, I'm privileged in that, as Helen said, I had traveled to Gaza and the West Bank on numerous occasions from 2011 to 2020. And as a medic, your voice is highly respected. So I had the opportunity to go to APPGs. These are all-party parliamentary groups where an NGO like MAP or Save the Children will invite you to go and speak and advocate for the right to health for Palestinians and for the protection of healthcare infrastructure and healthcare professionals. And the UK government has the power to take meaningful action, but it continues to uphold these double standards. Like I said, the fast tracking of medical evacuations for Ukrainian children, but not for Palestinian children. And one of the most dangerous aspects of this conflict in Gaza, as I said, is the dehumanization of Palestinian children and the silencing of those who try to speak out. So as doctors, we must challenge this. We must demand medical evacuations, push the UK government to allow critically ill and injured children from Gaza to receive treatment in UK hospitals. We all have the resources, and many of people in this meeting have been pushing that and lobbying that hard. There is a potential breakthrough through Project Pure Hope, and Children Not Numbers, in that there has been a confirmation the government is apparently about to accept the first evacuees, but that will be done privately. It won't be done through government mechanisms, but that is a first step, and we hope that will happen. Secondly, hold professional bodies accountable. The Royal College of Pediatrics, the British Medical Association, the General Medical Council should all take a clear stance on the deliberate targeting of hospitals, medical workers, and children. Write letters, submit motions, demand that these institutions condemn Israeli war crimes and uphold international law. And engage with your MPs and policymakers. Continue to contact your local MPs, sign petitions, organize delegations to parliament. Urge them to impose sanctions on arms sales to Israel and call for an immediate ceasefire and humanitarian access, and to treat the root causes, which I'll come back to towards the end. The third area is strengthening medical solidarity and direct support. And this is probably the area that I've been most involved in the last 18 months or so. So advocacy has to go hand in hand with tangible action. Pediatricians can support Gaza's healthcare system by acts of solidarity. So in November 2023, myself and a group of medics who had been silenced and stopped from holding a fundraiser for Gaza decided to hold a vigil outside 10 Downing Street, which was attended by probably over 400 to 500 healthcare workers. This was the start of Health Workers for Palestine. And quite quickly, we expanded across 30 UK towns and cities, and then over 70 global cities, with some of these vigils continuing to happen on a weekly basis ever since then. So these acts of solidarity, they transcend, they go through social media, they reach the people of Gaza, and they see them, and it does make a difference to them. And it's an important show, an act of solidarity. And then partnering with Palestinian-led organizations. So the international NGOs like MAP, Save the Children, UNICEF have been doing excellent work, but the reality is Palestinian-led organizations like Palestinian Medical Relief Society, the International Red Cross, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, they require donations, they require help. They have been doing this work for decades. Many of them have been there for 40, 50, 60 years. And then fundraising for medical supplies, fundraising for humanitarian aid to go in, although as we know at the moment, the reality is that everything is cut off. And finally, supporting healthcare workers under attack, doctors and nurses in Gaza that are being systematically targeted. Use your voice to protect them. One actual tangible action which you can take, and I'll put the link shortly in the chat. So as Health Workers for Palestine, we've partnered with Dr. Hassan Abu Sitta, Dr. Mads Gilbert, Dr. Ahmed Mukhalalati. These are, as you know, extremely well-known figures within the Palestine healthcare scene, to launch a mutual aid fund. The reality is 1,200 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza. Many of them were the sole breadwinners for their families. The unemployment rate in Gaza has reached 80%. Cost of living has skyrocketed by over 300%. So our first phase of the Solidarity Fund is to donate and help fundraise for the families of the healthcare workers that have been killed in a dignified way, to allow them to be able to continue. And this will then lead on to phase 2 and phase 3, where it will be much more direct support of healthcare workers as such. So that's one tangible action you can take. I'd also say challenging institutional racism and medical apartheid is key. The UK's failure to treat Palestinian children equally is not just political. It's part of a broader system of institutional racism that devalues some lives over others. We have to be able to challenge the media, demanding accurate reporting on the crisis in Gaza. When Palestinian children are called collateral damage rather than victims, call it out as racist. Put an Ofcom complaint in. If you have the voice and the platform, try to get onto these mainstream media programs to speak up. And also push for decolonization in medicine. UK medical institutions have a history of being complicit in colonial violence. Refusing to accept neutrality in the face of genocide is paramount. And finally, my final point is educating ourselves first and foremost, and then others regarding the root causes. Each time Gaza is bombed, the world responds with temporary outrage and calls for humanitarian aid. But let's be clear, aid is not enough. It's a substitute for justice. It's not a solution to systematic oppression. Sending food whilst allowing the siege to continue is not humanitarianism, it's complicity. Delivering medical supplies whilst hospitals are being bombed is not enough. It's enabling war crimes. We can provide emergency relief, but as long as Israel's apartheid system and military occupation remain, the cycle of destruction will continue. We are not dealing with a humanitarian crisis alone. We are dealing with political crisis rooted in decades of oppression and violence. And if we truly care about Palestinian children, we must not just treat their wounds, but stop the violence that is wounding them in the first place. That means ending Israel's illegal blockade and siege on Gaza, demanding an end to military occupation and apartheid policies, holding those responsible for war crimes accountable, pushing for long-term solutions that ensure Palestinian children have the right to live safely, in dignity, and in freedom. And I'd just like to end again to reiterate, as per the previous speakers, that please make your voices heard at the AGM on the 27th of March at midday. Any RCP-CH professional can be there, and it's, at the end of the day, you're helping the children of Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. Really powerful words, and also really tangible things that UK and other nationality paediatricians can get involved in. I just want to echo what you said about decolonizing our institutions, working in global child health in an academic background. This is something that has come to the fore over the last 5 years or so. There is now a lot of resources about how to decolonize the work, and recognizing that the significant colonial history that a lot of our institutions have and continue to have. So this is a topic that ICHG will be doing a webinar on in April, I think, date to be announced. So if anyone wants to educate themselves about what it means to decolonize, then please look out for that. So our final panelist, Rayhana, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Helen. And on the back of Omar's speech, again, I would like to encourage you and invite you to join our small group, because together we are a lot stronger and our voices can be heard a lot better. One of the common themes that we encounter with when we held meetings with the Royal College President, Professor Steve Turner, was about his understanding of, do the pediatricians and the members want these kind of discussions going through, and he's mindful that giving a space or air to this kind of a discussion might undermine other important matters for the members. And I think persistent in asking and requesting and putting demands in front of them to take a stance, to take a valid and a solid stance on the situation, showing to them that we care, we want to hear about it, we want our college to take action, is very important. And let's get united and join us at the Child Health Advocates for Palestine, and we can do some great things together. So yes, our final panelist, and who's put himself forward for the Royal College annual governance meeting this year, is Professor Ali Bokhari. He's a consultant pediatrician with expertise in cardiology, and he's also a medical director at a community organization and has held several senior roles within the NHS. Since 2023, Ali has done a lot of advocacy and work with education of medical students in Lebanon and mentorship of Palestinian medical students. So I would like to invite Ali to join us and tell us what made him write that motion, what was his motives behind it, and talk us through the motion and what he's asking the the governors of the Royal College for. There is only, from my understanding, usually there is either no motions or it's just one member's motion discussed. So it's not one of those meetings that a lot of motions are discussed. So the only motion discussed this year, and we're quite grateful for the opportunity, is Ali's motion. So Ali, please tell us, how did you write it and how are you feeling about it all?
Thank you, Rihanna. And thank you very much for inviting me. And it's great to hear colleagues who have a lot more experience in the field and have been doing practical things in Gaza and Palestine more than I have ever been able to do. But I wish I could tell you that I had a great plan or I had thought through this in great detail. But the invitation to put a members' motion came along from the Royal College, I think in January. And I looked around and I didn't see a motion that was going to speak to the devastation that the children in Palestine and Gaza especially have suffered. So I spoke to some of my colleagues here and in London and elsewhere, and we managed to put a motion together, which I was surprised to see somewhat. That was the only motion that went through. I know some of the colleagues wanted to put more motions together, but this time ran out because the time notice was actually quite short. So this motion, I'm just going to speak about the motion a little bit. And I don't know whether, shall I share it, Rihanna?
I can share it for you. Let me just try to
So colleagues and friends, the motion, I understand, is going to be debated on the annual general meeting, which is on the 27th of March. It will be a lunchtime meeting. It is both a face-to-face meeting and a hybrid meeting, i.e. you can join virtually. As I understand it, every member of the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health is able to join the AGM. You don't have to be registered at the conference. An invite will be sent to you by the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health. I spoke to the governance team there today, and I understand it is going to be sent on Monday. But I would ask, wherever possible, please, if you haven't already registered to come face-to-face, come face-to-face, because I'm told there will be opportunity after my brief presentation of this motion for a speaker to speak in opposition of this motion. Now, I find that really hard to believe. When you read this motion, hopefully you will see that it is absolutely a humanitarian motion. It does not criticize even a country directly. It doesn't name a religious group. It merely asks for the protection of children and healthcare workers, as well as facilities, cessation of violence, and then the ability to rebuild and support the devastation that has been left behind. But apparently there is going to be an opposition speaker who's going to speak opposing the motion. And then the colleagues in the hall will be allowed to speak and come forward either for or against. I'm not clear whether the colleagues joining online will also be able to speak. I'm going to ask that question because lots of colleagues can't get there, but they may well be able to join online. Then I understand there will be a vote, a paper vote for those who are in the hall itself. And a virtual vote for everybody who joins. And I'm also told that the virtual vote will then remain open for a period of time after the motion has been discussed. So therefore, colleagues, even if they can't join, but can read the motion, should be able to vote. I'm told the period is not decided how long the motion will remain open for, but at least it will be a matter of days afterwards. So the other thing we need to do is to drum up our colleagues to support the motion, both if they can come face-to-face and support me on the day, but also join virtually. And then even if they can't do that, then at least access the vote, the link that the college will be sent, and then you'll be able to read the motion and vote even after the event. So there are three possible opportunities. Clearly, I would like some support on the day, but in any other fashion would be also very good. So as I said, I'm not going to say a lot more. Everybody has said everything before. It's a devastating situation. We need to do everything we can do. We need to do advocacy. We need to find different actions that Omar has talked about and Hamad and other colleagues have mentioned. But I think one of the other things we need to do is to somehow get our Royal College back to where it was when Tony was describing its action. It seems to have moved away from its core functions and moved away from its core function of advocating and fighting for children's well-being and rights to somewhere else. And I think this motion might just be a start of a tipping point. If we are successful, I hope we are successful, then I think hopefully we can continue to use the motion as a springboard for demanding more, asking for more, and hopefully succeeding in some shape or form. So I'm just going to stop at that, Rihanna, if that's okay. I'm happy to later on take any questions.
Thank you, Ton. Thank you, Ali. This is a really, as you say, it's a very generous motion in terms of describing the situation in Gaza in all quite politically and quite humanitarian, written in the bit humanitarian head on, quite neutral as well. So it's really hard to believe that there are going to be people who are going to speak against the motion, and it just, for me, that will just question their Hippocratic oath of do no harm if they're going to go against such motions. But we have to appreciate the freedom of speech, and it's a democratic procedure. And with this, with the votes going in for the motion, we can demonstrate to our Royal College presidents and members of the board that how much people care, how much people want to hear more, and for the college to take a better stance on the situation. And sadly, it's not only the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health who've been pretty much silenced, it's all the other royal colleges. And something that we've been discussing is why, and we brought it up to be the president of the royal colleges, how dangerous it is for the royal colleges and academic fields to take a stance aligned with the government narratives. And that is a really dangerous stance. I mean, for a good example we can see is in America, where the governance stance on matters are quite disastrous. So organizations, and especially when they are members funded, they should really listen to the members, not to the government. Government's not paying them. We are paying them. We should demand, and they should do the right things. It's part of their charter to care about global health, and it's part of the charter to lobby with the British government to do the right things, along with the Children's Rights Act, along with all of that. And unfortunately, none of that is happening at the moment. So yes, I think there will be a lot of people attending the Royal College as usual, and I usually go every year. But I must say, I've never been to the AGM because it's usually at lunchtime. You want to catch up with your friends and colleagues, and you want to enjoy the lunch. So it is at lunchtime, and it only runs about an hour and a half. To be there in person is really important, because you will have a louder voice than people who are remotely joining. So if colleagues and friends on this webinar, if you know people who are, reach out to your pediatrician friends and say, are you going to the Royal College? Encourage them to attend the AGM. It's only an hour and a half of their time, and watch out for the motion, and also morally support Ali, who needs a lot of support. It's still quite not unusual, but it's still quite difficult to speak against the common trend and the common narrative, which is hushing any pro-Palestine talks. And despite being quite vocal for the last 18 months, I'm still quite apologetic when I talk about Palestine with my colleagues, and I approach them really gently and carefully. So yes, be there, spread the word. The AGM is called RCCH Governance. Watch out for the email. the RCPCH governance email will give you the link to vote and give you the link to attend, which is free. And even people who are in Glasgow or in Edinburgh, they're nearby, they want to drop by, they don't want to pay the hefty RCPCH annual conference, attendance fee. You are allowed to just walk in, register there and then, and take a lanyard and walk in to join the AGM, because it's free for all the members to attend. Yeah.
Thank you, Rayhana. Does anyone from the panel or from the audience have any questions to Ali about the motion or about how the voting will work? John, go ahead.
Well, I think it would be really important if, when the college sends out the invitation to the AGM, they make it clear that you can vote online, and that there's then an extended time period for voting, and say that what that is. I mean, I suspect they won't do that, but I don't know. I'm guessing they won't do it. I don't know if you can have a conversation with Ali about that, just saying if they're going to be sending out an invitation to everyone, if they could just make the voting system clear.
Yeah. So John, even today, this afternoon, when I spoke to them 4:45, they weren't exactly settled on how long a period after the AGM there will be ability to vote. They were, however, clear that they will be sending a link out with the 2 motions attached to it. The second one is actually nothing to do with, it's just something about the auditors and stuff. So that's, that's not something we are interested in. But the only other motion that will be attached will be this motion with a link for people to join the AGM and vote. So hopefully it will be very clear. But please, as Rayhana says, as many colleagues as we can reach out to, ask them to be expecting this and to be registering to vote. I don't know whether you have to register. I think it's just a matter of link, but there must be another way of. So please have a look. I'm not sure exactly whether the link is just a direct link or whether the link is to a register where you can then vote afterwards. But please tell everybody this is coming. Either turn up in as Rayhana put it, rock up on the day, or please vote online.
Yeah, sharing it within networks is really important, isn't it? Tony?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's about the motion, and it had been my intention to ask for an amendment to the motion to call on the college to take some action, because the motion is very good, but it doesn't request any college action. So the president is not obliged to do anything. But I think, and apparently they're not very keen on this, but I think if not, then I think it's worth saying, and I would be happy to say, that we would like to call on the college to respond to this by taking some action, such as, so that at least it's brought up, and maybe they would make a comment on it, because I think for them to not do anything on something like this would be pretty scandalous.
Absolutely, Tony.
Mm-hmm. Tony, if they don't agree with the amendments, I mean, are they due to the rules and regulations? I'm not very familiar with the RCPCH AGM. I think in a BMA you have to accept the amendments and all of that. But if they reject it, is there any room for us to do more advocacy and lobbying about that? For example, gathering member support for such actions?
Well, I think Ali should speak about what Graham Slight said about it. But my view would be, yes, we should definitely continue to lobby using the motion, assuming it's passed with a good majority, as the basis for saying that members want this.
Yeah, I think Graham's explanation for not having amendments was more procedural, in the sense that it's very complicated to organize a hybrid meeting, and then if colleagues start putting amendments from the floor, what about colleagues who are not on the floor, are online? How can they add amendments to it? Whether this is the genuine reason or is merely an excuse for not actually entertaining any amendments, I don't know. Tony, you're more experienced in this than I am, but I would say it did sound to me that the college was entertaining this motion, but would much rather not have anything, if I'm honest. That's how it came across.
I think that gets me to my point, Ali, that I think the motion is a really important marker for getting the college to accept it. But independent of the motion, there should be another action coming out of this webinar as well, maybe in collaboration with ICHG and Child Health Advocates for Palestine. I'm just aware that people are starting to drop out of the meeting and we're coming up to 8:30. I think that there is a lot of potential for really harnessing a lot of the connections, the experience, the advocacy expertise that we've had on this call and in the panel. And it would be good maybe to regroup, maybe with the ICHG advocacy subgroup leads, and see about what are the next steps that we can take.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And with regards to following up on this, if you follow the Blue Sky account for Child Health Advocates for Palestine, I will put links and some easy instructions on how to vote and how to join the AGM for you as well.
That would be really helpful. Yeah. Good. In the last few minutes, are there any other comments, questions for the panel? We've been a bit short on the discussion time, but if anyone has anything that hasn't been covered or they want to ask, just put your hand up. Okay, Tony. So, the question about Ukrainian children, yes. So RCPCH did a lot in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and this has been brought up with them, and they acknowledged that this was it was out of step with what they would normally do with the Ukraine. Thank you, Umair, and I'd really like to thank all of the panelists for your time and for speaking so eloquently and powerfully about this really important topic. And thank you everyone for attending. It's been quite a long meeting, but I hope quite a fruitful and productive one. And we've come away with some ideas about how we can improve our advocacy work. And just a final shout out at the Royal College meeting next Wednesday on the afternoon session of the Wednesday, we have the ICHG session. We have an amazing lineup. We have Professor Michelle Hayes talking about the NeoTree digital app. We've got some brilliant oral abstracts, and also Professor Ed Clark talking about innovations in vaccines. So if you are at the college meeting, please come along, have a chat with us, listen to the talks, and we hope to see you at some future events. Rehan, I'll give the last word to you.
Thank you, Helen. A special thanks to Helen and Kerry from ICHG in hosting this amazing webinar and hosting us as the new group, Child Health Advocates for Palestine. I'm also a new member of ICHG, so I encourage colleagues to join. They're doing amazing stuff in all aspects of global health and internal child health. There's something for everyone, actually. It's quite inspiring and quite moving. So I'm quite honored to be a new member, and I will definitely join you next Wednesday at the RCPCH workshop. Thank you. And thank you to all our wonderful panelists. And I really appreciate it's a Ramadan as well, and you've cut your prayers short to join us. It's been really appreciated from you all and everyone else who've joined us. And hopefully we can touch base on webinars like this in the future and collaborate and bring the matter to the surface and talk about it and take the stigma off it a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now. Good night.
Bye, everyone. Take care.